Welcome to Phrase by Phrase with Pastor Rick, where we study the Bible one phrase at a time in 5-minute chunks. Last time we were together, we were looking at James 1:13 and the phrase that says that Jesus cannot be tempted. And that led us to the statement that God cannot sin, which led us to the question, if God can't sin, then how could Jesus' temptation be real? Well, I want to dive into that today and begin to unpack the answer to that question. The first thing I want us to understand about Jesus is that he is one person with two natures. Theologians would say that he is inseparably united but not commingled or co-mixed. He's fully God and he's fully human, joined together into one person, two natures, divine and human, into one nature, and they're joined together, but they're not co-mixed. As an example, when we think of something being co-mixed, we would think of, say, for example, you might have yellow paint and you might have blue paint. And when you put yellow paint and blue paint together, it makes green paint. It's made a third new substance, and they can't be separated again. You can't produce yellow or blue anymore because now it's forever green. Well, that's not what this is saying with Jesus. It's not like the two natures joined into one and created this one third new thing. They retain their distinctiveness. He's fully God and he's fully man. It's kind of like joining together salt and pepper. You can mix salt and pepper together in one salt shaker, and so they're kind of together as a unit, and yet there's distinctly salt in there and there's distinctly pepper in there. And so Jesus, in that sense, is one person with two natures. He is both God and man, which helps us to understand really the apparent contradictions between his two natures. For example, Jesus as God is omnipotent, means he's all-powerful. And yet when we look at his life in the Gospels, he is so weak that he teaches all day and out of exhaustion falls asleep in the bow of a boat and literally sleeps through a storm when that's going on because of being so tired. And yet he's omnipotent. How can that be? Because he is two natures in one person. Or he is omniscient, meaning he's all-knowing, and yet he does not know the time of the second coming set by the Father, according to his own words. And so, again, two natures, human and divine, but one person. And the union of these two natures, you have to understand that they're inseparably joined. They're not going to be torn apart anymore. They may be distinct, but they'll ever be joined as one person. So he will forever be the God-man. Charles Hodges, an 18th century theologian and professor at Princeton Theological Seminary, wrote these words. He said, "As a man is one person and all his acts are the acts of that one person, so all the acts of Christ are the acts of his whole person. Some are purely divine, like creation and preservation. Some are purely human, like eating, drinking, and sleeping. Some are acts in which both natures concur, like the work of redemption. Yet all these acts are the acts of Christ, of one and the same person. It was Christ who created the world, it was Christ who ate and drank, and it is Christ who redeems us from the power of darkness." So, because the two natures are distinct, it is possible for Jesus to be tempted in his human nature, but not possible for Jesus to be tempted in his divine nature. But even there, his temptation is different than ours because the source of Jesus' temptation and the source of our temptations are different. Temptation's source with fallen man comes from our fallen nature. In verses 14 and 15 of James 1, James says, "But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust." And then he goes on to describe that. It's impossible for God to be tempted in that sense because he has no fallen nature to entice him to do evil. So the temptation did not originate from within him, but was external to him and came from Satan. So in that sense, we could say it is impossible for God to be tempted. Jesus has no carnal lust within to entice him to sin. So any external appeal that Satan could direct toward Jesus could only be directed toward Jesus's humanity, for Satan's authority only extends to the earthly realm. He has no authority over God. And because of that, even though Jesus was tempted, it was not possible for him to sin. Now, some people think that that weakens his temptation, but it actually makes his temptation worse, which we will see next time when we dive into the Bible phrase by phrase.